everyone. Welcome to ChangeLab Solutions video series on navigating local housing strategies. My name is Edgar Camaro and I'm a planner at ChangeLab Solutions. In this video, we'll be discussing housing stability and all of the challenges and opportunities that go with it. For those of you who are joining us for the first time, this video is part of ChangeLab Solutions Housing Solutions Collaborative. The Housing Solutions Collaborative is a year-long learning cohort that convenes cross-sector housing teams in 8 small to mid-sized cities across the United States. The primary goal of the teams is to confront conditions that impede housing equity in their communities. Our hope is that these collaborations can generate idea and expertise sharing between housing experts and advocates in communities. In addition, the Housing Solutions Collaborative provides the teams with tailored technical assistance and a shared foundation for collective problem solving. The topic of today's discussion, housing stability, yields opportunities for children, youth, and adults because it serves as a foundation to help improve employment, health, and education outcomes. Stable housing means having choice over when and under what circumstances a household wants to move. Increasing the number of individuals living in stable and quality homes is a key piece to reach financial security and is linked to positive health outcomes. But as you may know, housing issues are complex and achieving housing stability is no different because there are plenty of considerations and hurdles along the way that are important to properly navigate. So without further ado, please join me in welcoming Corey Root from the Orange County team and Tony Curtis from the Louisville team. We'll be getting started with introductions. So with that being said, Corey, we'll start with you and then we'll transition to Tony. Can you please introduce yourself, your role, and tell us about the housing conditions in your community with a specific focus on housing stability?
Sure, thanks, Edgar, and thanks for the opportunity to talk about housing and our housing programs. It's pretty much my favorite thing to do, so thank you so much. So yeah, my name is Corey Root. I'm from Orange County, North Carolina, and I work for the county as the housing director. And Orange County is a relatively small county. Population-wise, we're just under 200,000. We're home to the University of North Carolina, so a lot of town-gown issues. And you know, the general context I think is probably pretty familiar to everyone. Not enough affordable housing, gentrification, you know, all of these things definitely at play. We have several different programs in the department having to do with housing stability. The main point of entry for folks in housing crisis to any of our programs, and really is set up as a kind of one-stop shop for all housing questions, is our housing helpline. So we have a coordinated entry point, if folks know that jargony term from the homelessness COC world. But this is, you know, a centralized access point with standardized assessments and things like that. So that is one program that we run. There's 6 full-time staff, and they answer over 20,000 emails, calls, and 17,000 emails. So it's a high volume even for our small county of folks. We also stood up an emergency housing assistance program. And since the start of the pandemic, we've pushed out over $12 million in rent and utility assistance. This program existed pre-pandemic, but sort of in a different form. So in Orange County, we have the county, of course, and then the town of Chapel Hill, town of Carrboro, town of Hillsborough. And each of those 4 jurisdictions had their own rent assistance program pre-pandemic, but we combined them all, made common eligibility, common, you know, program guidelines and whatnot. And again, that just is making it a lot easier for folks to access what they need and get the assistance that they need. We also have a very low barrier program, so there are no caps or limits or things of that nature. Another program that helps folks retain their housing is the Longtime Homeowner Assistance Program. This is a property tax assistance program. So we had a pilot program last year that had pretty small number of applications, but we did feel like it was, or it's not my decision. The county commissioners thought it was a good idea to continue this. And so we have really lowered, again, the eligibility requirements from 10 years having to own your home to 5 years. Really, there's a lot of focus with our department on increasing access, increasing outreach, that kind of thing. We're doing program materials in our main languages here in Orange County, which are English, Spanish, Burmese, and Karen. So we're producing all flyers and applications and everything in all 4 languages this year. We're looking forward to seeing, and we've already actually surpassed the number just in 29 days that the program's been open so far. We've already surpassed the number of applications from last year. So we're hopeful about that outreach. We also have an eviction diversion program. And so we offer free legal counsel to anyone who's in eviction proceedings. And we interpret that very liberally. You don't have to have a 30-day notice. It can just be and a landlord saying the word eviction, and we can kick in that type of support. The county also administers home funds, which of course, I think most folks are familiar with home for affordable housing development and rehabilitation. And then we also run rehab and repair programs as well in the department using a number of different funding sources. So lots going on here to try to get folks to be able to maintain their housing.
Thank you for sharing that. And thank you for sharing all the programs. Definitely looking forward to hearing more about them in our later question. With that being said, Tony, can you please introduce yourself, your role, and tell us about the housing conditions in your community with a specific focus on housing stability?
Most definitely. Thank you for having MHC at the table here, Edgar. I am Tony Curtis. I'm the Executive Director of the Metropolitan Housing Coalition in Louisville, Kentucky. And we are an organization that engages in research-based advocacy for fair, accessible, and affordable housing. We've been around since 1989, so we're outside the government structure, working as advocates and educating in the community. A lot of what we do is based out of our main publication. We publish the State of Metropolitan Housing Report on an annual basis. We've done it for 19 years, so next year will be the 20th anniversary of that report. But it tracks 9 measures of housing, but also has a focus topic for every year. So every report is different, and we drill down on a topic every year. This year's was kind of an interesting and special issue because we're going to have a changeover in our mayoral office for the first time in several years. And several Metro Council are also changing hands as well to new voices. So identifying those affordable housing advocates is very important. But the report was structured in a way that it is a roadmap. It's an inventory of housing policy in Louisville to see where we are, where we need to do better, and for those elected officials and policymakers to have a report on their shelf to be able to act on day one and really start moving the housing discussion forward. Housing and homelessness has been at the forefront of our community discussion for quite a while now, even more magnified during the pandemic. And in recent surveys, housing and homelessness ranks as a top issue identified by the citizens of the county and the city. So that report really sets up our advocacy agenda for the year. And where there's a housing conversation, MHC usually is at the table, or we're convening the conversation, bringing together our diverse coalition. We're a coalition of about 300 members, organizations, and individuals, from financial institutions down to community activists and governmental offices. So it's a very diverse coalition. And we work on a variety of issues. It's housing and housing tangential as well. Utility work is at the center of our work on an annual basis. We've long been involved in rate cases before the Kentucky Public Service Commission on gas and electric affordability issues. We also have been working on, for the first time this year, through a grant from the U.S. Water Alliance in conjunction with the water company and the sewer district, on water affordability, accessibility, and equity. And so that's been a big part of the conversation, and I think made even more prominent by the pandemic. People are connecting the cost of utilities to having stable housing. There is an unmet need of 31,412 units at 30% or below area median income in our city. And that was a 2019 study, pre-pandemic study, and up to about 55,000 at or below 50% area median income. So this is pre-pandemic numbers. I'm sure it's gotten worse. That 31,000 unit was projected to cost about $3.5 billion pre-pandemic. So you can only guess with inflation, the cost of supplies, and supply issues, those costs have gone up. So we have a huge number of units that we need to create. Another thing has been rental assistance and utility assistance. Those programs have played a huge role in keeping people healthy and safe in their homes during a global pandemic. Those have not really been present in years past. So that federal money that flowed in to fund these, we were really good. Louisville was really good at getting that money into the hands of renters and tenants. And when there were roadblocks and barriers from landlords who refused to provide W-9s, we found ways to get it into the hands of the tenants themselves to pay their rent, to keep them safe and in their home. So we're really looking at long-term sustainability in regards to those assistance programs as well. And I think really what we're recognizing here in Louisville too, in looking at housing stability, looking at, the TIF that was just created in Louisville, about how we, anti-displacement strategies, looking at pathways to home ownership, ways in which to keep people housed and in their neighborhoods if they so choose want to be in that neighborhoods, and not be forced to be displaced when gentrification occurs in some areas. So we've got a lot of policy ideas that we've been discussing through Change Lab Solutions with our partners. But we're really recognizing the overarching question of, we need a comprehensive housing strategy, a comprehensive housing plan for our community. And a lot of people are talking about housing, but we need to figure out how to get everybody on the same page and with the same goals moving forward. There are a lot of diverse voices right now. Some are talking to each other, some aren't. But if we can come up to agree on kind of a framework and a path forward, that is very important. And I think that's the importance of MHC as a convener, as an organization that brings the coalition together to achieve some of these policy outcomes. And advocacy is about the long term. So we're here hopefully for the long term to have those conversations and can move it forward.
Thank you for sharing that. I think it goes to show the spectrum and how robust both of your communities, how much y'all are doing to tackle this issue and address housing stability. So thank y'all for sharing that. But the second question, now that y'all have presented the conditions, can y'all describe any initial obstacles or challenges that y'all have faced or foresee facing when trying to address housing stability? We'll start with Corey and then we'll pass the mic over to Tony.
Yeah, since we stood up so many programs during the pandemic, there are obviously just challenges inherent in that, as far as like everything being remote, people not meeting each other, for 2 years, at all, those kinds of things. But those actually went smoother than I anticipated. I remember it was, March 2020, I think it was around March 15th or so, thinking like, can we even do an interview not in person? Yes, the answer is yes. Like, we've done many, we've hired, we've doubled the size of our department all during COVID. So yeah, it's definitely possible to do all of that, but that was daunting and uncharted territory for us. And then, there's so many funding sources. I don't know if other folks experienced this as well, but we, when we were standing stuff up quickly, we were using local dollars, then CARES came in, then there was more CARES, and then there's more CARES and more CARES, we were getting CARES from lots of different sources, from the municipalities, from the county, and then from the state, we got a big chunk that had to be spent pretty quickly. So lots of shifting sands in the funding area. And then, since then, even we've had CDBG-CV and lots of different things. And of course, they each have their own special snowflake, requirements as far as reporting and that kind of thing. So just keeping our head above water with all of the grants and reporting has been really tough. But I think, yeah, and we don't have a particular grants person. This has really been spread out over all staff. Maybe a silver lining is we have a lot more expertise on staff now. We didn't know CDBG before, now we do. There are things like that that are definitely going to help in the long run, but we're hard in the time.
Thank you, Corey, for sharing that. I mean, I think it goes to show, like, one, the capacity that some communities may be facing, but even just being able to get funding in and funding out the door and executing definitely goes to show, especially with the money coming in from the federal level. So with that being said, Tony, do you mind describing any initial obstacles or challenges that y'all have faced in Louisville or foresee facing when trying to address housing stability?
I would say, how long does everybody have here? Because we could fill up a lot of time with this discussion. And I think Corey's right, hit on two really good points there, is capacity. Capacity from a funding perspective, but capacity from a people perspective. A lot of time and energy was spent in standing up programs, making them efficient, finding where the inefficiencies and barriers were, trying to correct that, and with this kind of funding that is sunset at some point, right? It's federal funding's coming in for a short period of time, and so there's, like I said, there's lots of unmet need here as far as number of units we need, but we get $10 million a year for our Affordable Housing Trust Fund. Sometimes that money, pre-pandemic was leveraged for about $13 for every dollar they had. But when you look at that need at $3.5 billion, that's a drop in the bucket. And that was only for 30% below AMI. I mean, if you're building a development, you're not building only for 30% AMI, you're building for other income groups as well. That's just a drop in the bucket. It really is. Even with ARPA dollars, where we managed to get about $100 million allocated to housing in Louisville, it was the top priority through a community survey. 40 million went to the Affordable Housing Trust Fund specifically for 30% and below AMI, and another 34, I think, million went for permanent supportive housing and some various other projects. But those are barriers in themselves. You got lots of money flowing in all of a sudden, and you got to figure out how to get that out into the hands to actually produce the results. And then just thinking about pandemic money, and Corey hit this too, is like every program had changing eligibility requirements, what paperwork you had to file, what paperwork that landlords were willing to submit. Some weren't willing to submit W-9, so that was a barrier for tenants to be able to pay their rent when they were facing eviction court. Eviction court itself is a barrier. When pre-pandemic world, you'd have 93 cases going through in about 30 minutes. Tenants weren't being representative. Landlords with their lawyers were being represented, and the only question the judge would ask would be, did you pay your rent? And if the tenant said no, if they were there at the court date, they would give a judgment automatically for the landlord. So they have a right to trial. And this was a huge barrier to try to think about eviction court and eviction court reform, what it looks like over the long term. Another big permanent barrier that's been around for decades and decades is the land development code, zoning issues here in Louisville. History of redlining. The land development code is the regulatory document that really brings out what is put in the comprehensive plan. And for the first time ever, a couple of years ago, with our new comprehensive plan, affordable housing and fair housing were mentioned for the first time. And so now we're trying to capture the spirit of that document and put it in the regulatory document, the land development code, which tells you what can be built, where it can be built, and ultimately where you can live. So your zip code matters in many ways. And so looking at this and doing an equity review of the land development code, making sure affordable housing and fair housing is part of that discussion is more important than ever. And that's going to be a huge focus of MHC's work. It has been for the last few years and will be moving forward probably 3 to 5 years from now to get through all the different phases of that. And just thinking barriers as well. And it's a barrier, it's an obstacle. It's a lot of things, is the political will. There's a lack of political will to get behind affordable housing developments. We have 26 districts here in Louisville, represented by a council member in each district. They're little fiefdoms. There's a lot of NIMBYism, some gentleman's agreement behind closed doors. If you don't vote for it in my district, I won't vote for it in your district, but yes, for pro-affordable housing. Nothing ever gets done that way. We're not going to meet the need if we're talking about housing opportunity and housing choice across all of Louisville if each district is saying no to affordable housing in their districts. And then I would say that housing is really at the forefront of the discussion. I think people were not seeing the need pre-pandemic. Pandemic opened people's eyes to housing instability, to the need to have a safe and a housing situation, stable housing situation with a roof over your head, access to healthcare, and access to utilities when people were forced to stay home for school, for work. The internet being a utility that is a priority is important. So I think if anything, we overcame some obstacles in people being able to see that housing is the key issue that impacts, it's the keystone issue. It impacts transportation and access to health outcomes. When you can live in West Louisville or East Louisville. West Louisville is traditionally a very concentrations of poverty, African-American families, female-headed households. East Louisville is kind of the richer part of town. And there's a 12 to 15 year life expectancy difference. So tell me that zip code does not matter when you talk about these issues. And so there has to be solutions and opportunities and choice for people across all Louisville that are safe, that are affordable, and that are accessible to people. So that's kind of the situation where we are, and some of the issues we're hitting head on. Even when barriers are there, we keep running our head against that barrier, but we try to find ways around it to make the situation better.
And you're right, Tony. I mean, you raise a great point in how long do we have to discuss housing stability, just housing issues, right? We can go on for days, hours. I mean, unpack every little area within housing itself, affordability, stability. But I think y'all definitely raised and provided a very comprehensive landscape of the housing issues, challenges, barriers. And so thank y'all for sharing that. I mean, y'all discussed capacity, political landscape, we even discussed land use planning itself. So now that we've discussed existing housing conditions and challenges, for the last question, can you please share an innovative strategy or potential areas of opportunities to address housing stability? And we'll start with Corey, and then we'll pass the mic to Tony.
Thanks, Edgar. Yeah, I was so happy to hear Tony bring up equity. I feel strongly that if you are not doing housing work with a racial equity lens, you're not doing it effectively. It absolutely has to be part of every conversation and just a filter that we use for all of our work. So to that end, I mean, we're doing what I consider very simple things, but that hadn't been done heretofore, of like really explicitly naming equity in our mission and vision statements. We are collecting data by race for every program. Like, again, this is not sort of rocket science, but it was not being done prior. And so this gives us, of course, a lot of data that we can use and slice and dice, both on what's happening as far as folks coming in, but also the outcomes that we really are excited. And we look at sort of ongoing, understanding that, homelessness and other housing instability definitely disproportionately affects folks in North Carolina, primarily who are Black and African American. So, that's a really key component of every piece of our work. Another really key component is implementing trauma-informed care into everything that we're doing. And again, to me, this is sort of a no-brainer, but had not been done as robustly as we're doing things now. And so that involves training, mandatory training for all staff on what is trauma and what is trauma-informed care, and, all of these good things, that happens at the onboarding stage. And then we have refreshers ongoing through the year. But then also at every team meeting, we're evaluating, how, and figuring out, how can we make things less stressful for folks who are in potentially, if not the worst, one of the worst crises of their life. How can we de-escalate? How can we, calm things down? And even, last week I was thinking, okay, our messaging about wait times, I feel like we can maybe tweak that a little bit. We were saying, it's a 4 to 6 week wait, but what I worked with staff and what we came up with was like a message more like, we got you. It's 4 to 6 weeks, but that doesn't mean you're going to be evicted. Landlords understand if the county's going to pay your arrears in a couple months going forward, they're good with that. And they understand if you're in the queue, nothing's happening as far as your housing stability. So just, these constant little tweaks and thinking about that, but really just trying to be kind, and put ourselves in folks' shoes of like, how would I like to be treated? And understanding that, behavior is usually having to do more with, what has happened to someone, not, what's wrong with them, or, these kind of much more harsh lenses. And we also really try to also incorporate that into all program design and implement like as low barrier as possible. We went from a 12-page application for emergency housing assistance to 2-page front and back, me on 1 page, 2 pages to fill out. So just as lean and, get the information that we need, but if we're not using it, we're not collecting it. And you don't need to tell me a bunch of like, what happened, just we're here, we're going to help, and we're going to be nice to you while we're doing that. So that's really a lot of what we're trying to do.
And I think that really highlights not just the innovative strategies, but taking it a step back and making it very personable, respectful, accessible, having integrity, and just being able to also revisit and refine, right? I think you mentioned that, like revisiting the policies and the procedures. So thank you for sharing that. Definitely creates a thinking note in me, like, when having these conversations with folks, being able to ask them, like, when was the last time you revisited and reviewed your policies and procedures? Just because it should be something that is ever evolving. So Tony, do you mind sharing innovative strategy or potential areas of opportunities to address housing stability?
Yeah, so there's a lot that we can discuss, and I'm going to kind of focus in on 3 things. During the pandemic, there was really a bright spot, and there weren't too many coming out of the pandemic, is that we had a lot of housing organizations pre-pandemic having siloed conversations with each other. We were all talking, but we early on, through our coalition, the Coalition of the Homeless was big and really starting this discussion and organizing it, but met on a weekly basis to really talk about housing issues. It was really revolved around the eviction crisis. So, the housing crisis and eviction crisis was here pre-pandemic, but magnified and exacerbated even when we had moratoriums in place, because now we're seeing the impacts of that long term. We're returning to pre-pandemic levels. But we had discussions. We scheduled it on a weekly basis at first, and it went to every 2 weeks, and now it's a monthly discussion. But we had direct service providers, we had advocates in the community, we had government officials, elected and policymakers, all sitting in a meeting having discussions about evictions, about utility and rental assistance, and how that was important to really update each other on a weekly basis on what was working, what wasn't working. When we found out that landlords weren't, giving W-9s in order to receive the rental assistance, that helped us to plan and try to convince Metro government to find a workaround, which they did, to do direct tenant payments. We continually talked about policies and procedures on eviction court, and how tenants can be more equitably represented. A right to counsel program grew out of that, and I think may have been one of the first in the South to actually pass. They did a pilot project project in 2021, 2022, they got refunded again. So they're servicing families with children that have a income that is 125% of poverty or below. And so that was a program that came out, and hopefully will continue to be funded to give tenants an more equitable position in the courtroom. So those conversations are not going to stop. They're going to continue on. They might take different shapes, but those groups who are coming together are going to continue to have these hard conversations too, in many respects. And this takes us into utility work. We, did a lot of energy related utility work, gas and electric, especially in regards to affordability of rates when rate cases came up before the Public Service Commission. And we're now working in water utility. And it's been and we've never been able to access water data before. We've never had really productive conversations before in regards to water utilities. And we're sitting down in a part of this U.S. Water Alliance grant with the Louisville Water Company and the Metro Sewer District, where we're talking about the importance of water. And they say the door's been opened. It's not going to shut on them either. And they are talking not only short-term planning to get through the pandemic, they're talking 1, 5, 10, 20 years out. They're doing long-term thinking now about water affordability, equity, and accessibility issues in our community. If only we could get LG&E and our energy providers to do the same and have those conversations, that would be great. So I feel like that's been a conversation that's not only been great for us to be able to be a part of that, realizing that housing and utilities go together, water utilities specifically, but that community conversation is one that will continue on for the long term. I think, that's just part of the magnification of how important these housing and utility issues and people recognizing they're intertwined in the community are for us. So that utility work is more important than ever. And then we received a grant last year from JP Morgan Chase to do a landlord eviction prevention study. There's a lot of data out there on tenants and evictions, not a lot of data out there on landlords and evictions. And so we decided we were going to do an eviction prevention study with landlords, do a survey of landlords. We had over 200, I think, surveys. I don't remember the exact number right now, come back in from various size landlords in our community. We did several interviews with kind of small to medium-sized landlords to talk through various issues. And a lot of that was around rental assistance program and the pandemic and how they saw local programs. It was interesting. They were very trustworthy of local programs and not realizing that money was federal money coming in to fund those programs. So very distrustful of the federal government because of moratoriums that were in place most of the time. So there was kind of some interesting messaging going on in there, and we'll publish this report this fall. But having those discussions, hearing kind of the generational divides between landlords on their viewpoints on what does rental assistance look like in the future? How do we get through a future pandemic, and what types of programs do we need? And rent controls even coming up as a conversation, especially with the younger generation of landlords who are seeing that the need is great and people can't afford rents out there when rents are going up in our communities. So that study, I think, is going to be really good. It's not only good for Louisville, but I think hopefully can be used as a model for other cities around the United States. So there's a lot of good work going on, a lot of great conversations, and we hope to continue to convene those conversations and be a part of those. Not only talk within Louisville, I think having these national discussions like we're having with partners through Change Lab Solutions, I think that's very important because you need to see what other people are doing as well. And it might just be a good fit for your community. So thank you for convening these conversations.
And I think this is definitely going to be an opportunity. And I think given the angles in which you're tackling housing stability, but how comprehensive in using emergency rental assistance, eviction prevention, utilities, I think this is definitely going to be important across the nation. And I think communities are going to be able to flag certain programs, activities, actions that y'all are using. So first of all, with that being the last question, we really appreciate you taking the time and sharing your knowledge and expertise with other communities across the US who may also be facing similar housing challenges. Before we sign off, I want to take a moment to thank you, both Corey and Tony, for joining me today and for participating in this video series. Today's video is of one of 3-part video series that we, Change Lab Solutions, will be releasing in the coming weeks. Please stay tuned for those future installments in which Change Lab Solutions staff will have access we'll have discussions with other Housing Solutions Collaborative partners. One other video will be on housing affordability, and the other video will be on strategies to support housing quality and preservation of naturally occurring affordable housing. With that being said, until next time, I'm Edgar Camaro here at Change Lab Solutions. Thank you so much for joining us today, and we'll see you next time.